to be all technology advanced and use the laptop and not paper. So thank you so much, Katie, for that warm introduction. And I'm so happy to be here with all of you today to celebrate Persons Day and reflect on this incredible journey that began in 1929 and that continues to shape our lives today. When Katie came to me and invited me to speak at this event, we've shared so many conversations about the journey of women since the Persons case, where we've been, where we are now, where we hope to go in the future. And Katie, your leadership for women and for communities, your contributions to making this world a better and kinder place have touched so many people, and so many people that are with us here today in this hall and online. You're such a bold and visionary person. And nowhere is that vision more clear than in the Garden of Eden project. I cannot fully express to you what the Garden of Eden project has brought to me and has meant to me. For those that haven't had an opportunity to look at the website or to see the art yet or to attend the first event that happened in June of this year, I'm going to explain a little bit. The Garden of Eden is a retelling of the stories of historic women through art and new feminist narratives about who they were, what they contributed to the world. The Garden of Eden asks a very bold question. What if these women had told their own stories? What if their stories had not been funneled through the machinery of the patriarchy, had not been part of the subjugation of women and the erasure of their contributions to the world? The Garden of Eden tells us new stories about so many women that you have heard about all throughout your lives. Jezebel, Tahiri, Mary Magdalene, the Queen of Sheba, and so many others. And Katie's going to talk to us a little bit later today about Joan of Arc. But for me, out of all of them, the one that touches my own heart the most is the story of Eve. Going all the way back to the beginning, the story of the first woman in the Abrahamic religions. And from the moment that Eve bit into that apple from the forbidden tree of knowledge, humans were cast out of paradise, and women were blamed for the whole lot of human pain and suffering. Eve's story for me is the catalyst of everything that we're going to talk about today, the pernicious narrative throughout history that has kept women from knowledge and from power. But what was Eve's quest for knowledge? What did she want to know? Why did she bite that apple? The Garden of Eden website has this to say. For centuries, we have learned and retaught that Eve's hunger for knowledge was shameful, that her selfishness caused the destruction of humanity. And Katie writes, I see freedom and power in Eve's story. What was she missing? And what did she hope to gain from that infamous bite? I ask, what if Eve had been venerated for seeking knowledge? And this is the power of the Garden of Eden project that Katie has brought to all of us, the bold retelling of the stories of these historic women. And in this retelling, imagining the world, the society that could have been if women had been equal participants in its creation. And today I want to explore a question that the Garden of Eden project brings so beautifully to life. What if? What if? This question, what if? It's more than just a thought experiment. It's a call to reimagine our world, to challenge the status quo, and to envision a future where women's stories, our voices, and our contributions are fully valued. This simple question, what if? It unlocks the theretofore unimaginable. It creates a path to unlock the unrealized possibilities. And it is the question that led a group of 5 Canadian women to ask, what if women are persons? So let's take a trip back to 1928. The previous decade before 1928 had been monumental for women's rights. During World War I, Canadian women left their traditional roles in the home and turned to working in munitions factories, farming, other production efforts. They took jobs to fill the roles left by men that were fighting in the war. In 1918, the Women's Franchise Act was enacted. The long fought for struggle by Canadian suffragists was finally achieved. Mostly because in 1917, the mothers and wives of men fighting in the war were allowed to vote. Can't put that cat back in the bag after that. But this act, the Women's Franchise Act, still excluded women from Quebec and Indigenous women from voting. While the role of women underwent great change in the post-World War I period, the social narrative was still one of women as quasi-property, of first their families and then their husbands. Women were seen as of the weaker sex, needing protection from the harsher realities of the world. And it was this narrative that underpinned a lasting interpretation of English common law that was spread throughout the Commonwealth, that excluded women from public service, voting, and holding public office. This exclusion was trussed up and presented as a gift to women, as an aid to women, excusing them from the burdens of these responsibilities out of respect for the fairer sex. Thank you so much. The influential case from the United Kingdom of Charlton and Lings, it was a case that, yet again, denied women the right to vote in 1867. But this case is very illustrative of the view of women at this time. Justice Wills said in Charlton and Lings that in this country in modern times, chiefly out of respect to women and a sense of decorum, and not from their want of intellect or their being for any other such reason unfit to take part in the government of the country, they have been excused from taking any share in this department of public affairs. Justice Wills continued to explain that women are under a legal incapacity to vote at elections. What was the cause of it? It's not necessary to go into, he wrote, but admitting that fickleness of judgment and liability to influence have sometimes been suggested as the ground of exclusion, here comes some fake allyship. He wrote, I must protest against its being supposed to arise in this country from any underrating of the sex, either in point of intellect or worth. That would be quite inconsistent with one of the glories of our civilization, the respect and honor in which women are held. And then to give himself some authority, he said, it's not just my own mere fancy, but that it will be found by other authors in the discussion of the origin of the exclusion of women from judicial and like public functions, where the author gives preference to this reason, that the exemption was founded upon motives of decorum and was a privilege of the sex. Yes, your outrage is correct. Justice Wills concluded this trope by saying and finding that women are persons in matters of pains and penalties, but not rights and privileges. So we could be punished and held accountable under the laws, but women could not have any part in the creation of those laws. This condescending idea about women was applied again and again in the British Commonwealth to keep people from voting and holding public office, but more so to exclude women from the complete realization of their personhood and the complete experience of their humanity. Yet, this exclusion from public life was not universally applied throughout the Commonwealth nor in Canada. While in Upper and Lower Canada, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, they upheld the tradition of excluding women for public office, Alberta was, for its time, liberal in the inclusion of women in public offices. And Alberta is where we will find the 5 women who would change the trajectory of the advancement of women in Canada forever. We have Nellie McClung, Canada's first female lawyer. Louise McKinney, she was the first woman elected into the Legislative Assembly of Alberta and the first woman to serve in a legislature in the British Empire. Emily Murphy was a Canadian women's rights activist and author. In 1916, she became the first female magistrate or judge in Canada and the 5th in the British Empire. Mary Irene Parlby was a Canadian women's farm leader, activist, and politician, and she served as an MLA in the Alberta government from 1921 to 1935. And Henrietta Muir Edwards, the namesake of our case, was the co-founder of the National Council of Women of Canada and the Victorian Order of Nurses, the first woman asked to participate in a council to provide the federal government council on policy. This group of women would become known as the Famous Five. And these women were tired of being excluded from further achievements. And on August 27th, 1927, they gathered at Emily Murphy's house in Edmonton. And as some tell the tale, as they were sipping tea on Emily's veranda, they formed a plan to fight the law that was keeping them out of the highest public offices in Canada. So a little constitutional law context. At the time, in 1927, 28, 29, Canada was not a colony of Britain, but it was still within the dominion of the British Empire. And our Constitution at this time was espoused in a document called the British North America Act, which generally left us to govern ourselves, except for matters like foreign policy, and some judicial matters were still retained by the Crown in the United Kingdom. So Section 24 of the British North America Act provided that the government could appoint senators to the Senate of Canada, and the specific language said that the Governor General shall from time to time in the Queen's name, by instrument under the Great Seal of Canada, summon qualified persons to the Senate. Qualified persons. The Canadian government had consistently interpreted Section 24's reference to persons to refer only to men, relying on the discriminatory view of women espoused in the British case law that I just explained. That it would be indecorous for women to hold public office and affront to our feminine qualities. It was our privilege to be excluded from these burdens. While sitting on that veranda, tea in hand, the Famous Five set out to change the government's mind. And I like to think of them sitting there asking, what if? What if we fought this? What if we win? What if we are persons? Because I believe that words have power. Words are the literal vibration of our thoughts and feelings. So imagine the psychological impact on not just these five very accomplished women, but on all women when they are told again and again that they are not a person. A person, this word in its simple definition means a human being regarded as an individual. A human being. An individual. And this is what the Canadian government was telling women, that you're not a human being or an individual under our laws. And imagine the impact on the spirit of women, that due to their gender and gender alone, that they were disqualified from the definition of person. So returning to our heroines in Alberta, what did they do? So at the time, there was a little-known provision in the Supreme Court of Canada Act that allowed any five persons acting as a unit to petition the government to refer a reference to the Supreme Court of Canada for an interpretation of any part of the Constitution. And that's exactly what the Famous Five did. They petitioned the government of William Lyon Mackenzie to answer the question whether the term persons in Section 24 of the British North America Act included women. To which Mr. Lyon Mackenzie responded resoundingly, it did not. And the case was sent to the Supreme Court of Canada, where unanimously the judges of the court also said no, women were not persons under Section 24 of the British North America Act. Then Justice Anglin applied the precedent in Charlton and Lings that I discussed earlier, upholding these centuries of subjugation and discrimination against women. British Columbia's Ellen Smith, who was the first female cabinet minister and female speaker of the legislature in the British Empire, reacted to this news by saying, "The iron dropped into the souls of women in Canada when we heard that it took a man to decree that his mother was not a person." Oh God, I love how they talked back then. The iron dropped into the souls of women, and certainly indeed it did, because undeterred, the famous five had one more chance. As Canada was at that time still part of the British Empire, the final level of appeal was to the Privy Council in the United Kingdom. And in the Privy Council, we find our ally, Lord Sankey, who wrote, "The word person, as above mentioned, may include members of both sexes, and to those who ask why the word should include females, the obvious answer is, why should it not?" And Lord Sankey took things one step further, saying that the exclusion of women from all public offices is a relic of days more barbarous than ours. And with that, women were declared persons, human beings and individuals. Because this decision was not just about eligibility for the Senate, because, probably doesn't matter that much to most people, but it was a statement that women had a rightful place, that they had something to contribute to this society, to public life. And imagine the validation and the relief, the pride that the famous five felt when they finally were declared persons. Member of the famous five and namesake of the case, Henrietta Muir Edwards, said in response to the judgment, "This decision marks the abolition of sex in politics." Oh, Henrietta, if only it were true. In so many ways. She continued, she said, "Personally, I don't care whether or not women ever sit in the Senate, but we fought for the privilege for them to do so. And we have sought to establish the personal individuality of women, and this decision is the announcement of our victory." And this decision had reverberations throughout the British Empire because it clearly asserted that anti-suffragists could no longer suppress women's rights through clever legal arguments and prejudiced traditions. Also, many other countries in the Commonwealth adopted the new definition of persons as always meaning both women and men. Unfortunately, none of the famous five were ever appointed to the Senate due to a trick of our Constitution that requires senators be appointed based on region, and then, of course, based on the political party of the one appointing them. But the honor of being the first woman senator went to Corinne Wilson from Ontario, who was appointed 4 months after Lord Sankey's decision was issued. I think it's important, though, while we're celebrating this victory of the person's case, that the person's case extended personhood to some Canadian women, not all of them. We can't forget that the famous five, these women, they were all products of their time, all white Christian women, with some holding ideas that should never have been acceptable and are certainly not acceptable now. It's true that many held racist and elitist ideas, writing and speaking on important topics like eugenics. So while the person's case was a victory for some Canadian women, it was not meant at that time to apply to all Canadian women. And we must never forget and remember the continuing struggles of Indigenous women and women of color in this country. Yet the person's case gave us another gift, one that would allow our society, our laws, our rights to grow and change, to become more inclusive with time, and to protect more people. Because the person's case gave Canada this second important constitutional moment, the creation of the living tree doctrine. And my fellow lawyers in the audience will know what I'm talking about. As we saw in the person's case, right, our Supreme Court looked backwards and applied a traditional view of women and their place in society that no longer reflected the social change that had occurred during World War I. Lord Sankey changed this looking backwards. Lord Sankey wrote in the person's case that the British North America Act planted in Canada a living tree capable of growth and expansion within its natural limits. And this is what became known as the Living Tree Doctrine, a progressive interpretation doctrine of our Constitution. I'm going to condense, some decades of constitutional law, but basically the Living Tree Doctrine means that Canada's Constitution, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms now, is to be interpreted in a large and liberal manner within natural limits to reflect the society of the day. This doctrine has given Canada a mechanism to allow our Constitution and our charter case law to grow and change as our society has grown and changed. It's given us an expansion of our rights and freedoms reflective of a society that has grown more diverse, more open, and more accepting of all of the people in this country. The Living Tree Doctrine and the progressive interpretation of our Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms has been applied in this country to make same-sex marriage legal, expand and protect Indigenous rights, provide and protect abortion rights, erase criminal sanctions against sex workers, and expand protections on the basis of sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation. So the fight of these 5 women in Alberta, their fight to become persons under our laws, introduced a doctrine of constitutional interpretation that still allows our country, our laws, our rights to grow and change with our society as we continue to grow and change. The Persons case was a turning point, but it was only a beginning. Since that day, women continue to ask, what if? And push the boundaries of what is possible. Because we all know and have experienced, everyone in this room, the Persons case did not magically change things and we all became very equal and had an equal part in everything. No, the 9 decades that have passed since 1929 to today have been a frustratingly slow process of women's inclusion in all aspects of Canadian society. Education, work, business, wealth, politics, 9 decades later, and we're still not at full inclusion. Heck, we still can't even get equal pay. Katie's hard at work at that. Thank you so much. Yet today, we have more women leading companies, founding startups, shaping politics and leadership than ever before. And yet there's still a gap, one that speaks to representation and the balance of power. Women are often juggling multiple roles, executives by day, caregivers by night. The pandemic showed us that women, especially mothers, disproportionately carry the burden of unpaid care work, and that women make up a large portion of those in precarious work in sectors that are underpaid and undervalued. And while we celebrate trailblazers who have shattered glass ceilings, there are still many women facing barriers, particularly those from intersectional, marginalized communities. There are still too many of us facing violence because I say we cannot have true equality of all Canadian women until Canadian Indigenous women are equal, and Indigenous women cannot be equal while Indigenous women are still missing and being murdered in this country. And while we sit at the precipice of the greatest social change for the advancement of women yet, there are still too many things left undone. And now we live with the specter of what is happening in the United States, with the overt backlash against women, the easiness with which gendered insults are hurled by the Republican candidates. Because I see you out there, my fellow childless cat ladies, I see you. And while we laugh, because it's weird, while we laugh, it still hurts. It still hurts because underneath it all, we know it comes from a place of not being truly valued and not being truly included, that we are different and we are seen as less by too many people. Yes, we still face barriers, and yes, we still face violence, and yes, we still do not have full equality and inclusion. But I tell you right now that I am so happy to have been born as a woman in this lifetime and be part of this moment in history with all of you as a woman. Because now we get to ask new what ifs. We are moving from asking to have a seat at a table that was never built for us, that has actively tried to exclude us. Now we get to ask new questions. We get to ask, what if we rebuilt the table? We live, go to work, build businesses, contribute overwhelmingly to an economy that was not built to consider the life experiences of women. Think about it. We go to school, we go to college, university, when we're at our most fertile, and many of us may want to have families. And then we enter our highest earning years when we enter menopause, and everything just goes a little weird. So our entire work and economic realities do not account for the real physical, biological life experiences of women. So let's ask, what if work and economy reflected women's life cycle? Decades of studies show women leaders help increase productivity, enhance collaboration, inspire organizational dedication, and improve fairness. Yet there's a persistent continuation and admiration of old leadership styles of dominance, hierarchy, and exclusion. So let's ask, what if we change society's view of what is good leadership? Who is a good leader? Majority-owned women businesses only accounted for 19.6% of all private sector businesses in Canada at the start of 2024. We are 51% of this population. And yet, are we surprised? Because this is a reflection of the amount of VC funding that goes to women-owned businesses. In 2022, only 12% of VC funding went to companies with at least one woman founder. So let's ask, what if? What if women received the equal funding, mentorship, and support for their businesses in this country? What if? We're at such an important historical moment for women, where we've never had this much economic and political power. And I tell you, I am praying to all the gods and goddesses that will listen that Kamala Harris becomes the next president of the United States of America. Because as more women gain power and a place at the table, we must ask new what-if questions so we can uplift even more women. So I propose to you that the question for our time, the question for this moment in history, is what if the world was intentionally designed to uplift and empower women? What if? Please take this question home with you. Ask, what would this world look like? And then take your ideas and put them into action. So, before Katie and I continue to discuss exactly this question, I want to thank you so much for being here with us and supporting this event. This year is a celebration of 95 years since the Persons case was decided. And I plan to be here every year, and I plan to be here in 5 years to celebrate 100 years of the Persons case. So I hope you all are going to join us for these great celebrations in the future. Thank you. Okay, good. Okay, Katie, go ahead and book the hall. It'll be good. Okay. I want to do some quick thank yous. Well, she's not here in the hall. I know she's watching online. Marianne McConkey. Marianne is the godmother of labor relations and pay equity at the University of Toronto. Back when this was all first getting started. Marianne, I'm so happy to have your mentorship and your friendship. I also want to thank Orchid Shahi, who's here right in front of me. Orchid, you've created such a wonderful collective of women. You're the best supporter of women in business. Thank you again so much for your friendship, your kindness, your advice, and your time. My Verity sisters that are out there, thank you, thank you, thank you. My business partner, Ted Panagiotoulias, thank you so much for coming on crazy adventures with me and trusting me. And our colleague, Elena Kaminsky, who did so much of the research that you all saw in the wonderful posts that were going on social media about the history of women in Canada. And last, my mom. She traveled here to be with me today, and I just want to say thank you for always being an example of strength and just getting things done with grit and determination. I love you. Thank you.